Hi, it's Jamie with UK Extension, and we're continuing our series of common houseplant pests, and the one we're talking about here is known as spider mite. Red spider mite is a specific type of mite. There are others, but it's the most common one we deal with in landscape and houseplant settings. So I'm going to focus on it today, but management strategies are similar for all of the mites with the exception that some might be cooler season. So spider mites are tiny little arachnids, little eight-legged critters that are very hard to spot with the naked eye. So they can really wreak havoc on a plant because their numbers have the potential to really get out of hand before you first notice the problem. So the mites themselves will often be not the first thing noticed. One of the first telltale signs of mite infestations are stippling on the leaves. Generally, newer, softer growth is attacked first, but they can feed on any aged leaf surface. But when they're feeding, think about these being tiny little sucking insects that puncture the leaf and suck out the liquid saps for their energy. When you do that, the chloroplasts die and you get tiny little white spots in those cells that can coalesce to cover the whole leaf. So little tiny spots that don't look quite right, light in the shade of green, that sort of thing, can be an indication you have a spider mite problem. Other indications of severe infestations, often when they're really bad, you can rub the bottom surface of the leaf and it will feel somewhat gritty. And if you really let them eat you out of house and home, you'll start seeing webbing, distinct little spider-like webs, generally close to the stem, congregated, and those you can often see the little insects moving. There's a fairly simple test for mites. If I were to take a clipboard or something, just a white notebook paper, something white, and just really tap the suspect branch on it against that white backdrop, you would be able to see these little things crawling, little tiny specks moving around. They're smaller than a period at the end of a sentence actually, so they're tiny, but on the white background they'll stand out. If you find you have them, they're not outrageously easy to control, but a few things that will help. Let's talk first about cultural controls or environmental things. Spider mites tend to be attracted to plants that are stressed, particularly plants that are drought stressed. So if you neglect plants or let them get drier than they would like to be, particularly in the hot, dry summer, these things can explode very quickly. Many of us take our plants outside for the summer, which is a wonderful practice, but it also exposes them to several insects and things, and they often pick up some spider mites along the way. Spider mites thrive in low humidity and plants that are drier. So if you can avoid those conditions, I will mention they are not only pests of houseplants, but also many of our common landscape plants as well. So they're kind of ubiquitous. But keeping humidity levels up, if your plant's outside for the summer, you can spray it with a hose routinely, try and wet all the surfaces just to increase that humidity within the crown and make conditions less hospitable for these things. You can also spray with soapy water. Now this has to be an ongoing treatment week after week after week because you can kill the insects that you get the soapy water on because they're soft-bodied, but the egg masses will continue to hatch, and it's not a 100% solution. It will take care of some of the problem. Neem oil is another alternative that's very similar. Not going to save the world necessarily, but it does have some limited efficacy, and of course it's a little safer to use than some of the chemicals. So if you're having a spider mite infestation, if it gets really, really bad enough, and this would be my recommendation for most of the houseplant pests, if the plant's really, really far gone and has a terrible problem, you're better served to just throw it out if it wasn't your grandmother's ficus or something. If it's not terribly significant to you, just chuck it because these things can be next to impossible to control once they're full blown. The key, like it is with everything, is to scout frequently, scout early, keep the growing conditions optimal, and be on the lookout because if you catch it on the first branch or something, that's a fairly easy remedy. You can also just prune off spider mite damage. They will come back, but that's another approach to some of this really dire stuff to get most of them just chopped off. So these are awesome tips about managing spider mite. On houseplants, these same techniques will work outdoors, but of course outdoors we have some chemical options that work on landscape plants. Don't like to do those inside. But spider mite can be a devastating issue. Know what you're looking for, know how to spot it, and then you'll be in a great position to keep it from getting out of control.